So as I said in my worst of 2021 list, there were a ton of bad movies this year. Some were even so bad that I honestly questioned if we were going to ever see great cinema ever again. But then I watched CI Ape and all was right with the world again. 2021 may have been a pretty rough year for movies, but that doesn't mean there wasn't the occasional gem hidden throughout. I'm of the belief that there are still good movies being made today. It's just harder to sift through the crap to get to them. But they're there nonetheless. So I've compiled a list of my top 10 favorites of the year. I should specify that I haven't seen every single movie released in 2021, so maybe you think some movies belong on this list because you like them. Just know that these are all my opinions, and if you disagree with any of these rankings, good for you, but don't view them as a personal attack on your best of the year list. Anyway, let's get positive and talk about my favorite movies of the year.
Sparkle, sparkle, sparkle! Fuck yeah! Sparkle, sparkle, sparkle!
I'm not usually a fan of documentaries, but the Sparks Brothers is that rare combination that would get me to watch one. Not only is it on these two weird and interesting guys who have had a career spanning several decades, but it's also directed by Edgar Wright, one of my favorite directors of all time. How could I not be sucked in? Even though this isn't Wright's usual flair, the movie is still vastly interesting. I love hearing about Ron and Russell and their long journey in the music business throughout the years. Some of their songs seem right up my alley, and I can't wait to start listening to their stuff immediately. It was incredibly satisfying to hear every time they had a hit, and it was heartbreaking to hear whenever one of their albums would flop. One thing I absolutely respect these guys for is their refusal to quit. Not because they know that one day they'll be megastars, but because they're already proud of their work and just enjoy making music. It's quite refreshing hearing about a bunch of artists just being happy with their craft. This isn't some sappy Hollywood biopic where we learn about the rise and fall of these guys. There is no rise and fall. They're just doing what they enjoy, and I really respect that. As someone who hasn't got a huge following, I too am not in it for the views or fame. I just enjoy making the content I want to make, so this was an important documentary for me, and I absolutely loved it. I'm excited to check out more of their stuff, and also this was the best Edgar Wright movie of 2021 because Last Night in Soho was garbage.
Green is not a creative color.
The Green Knight is basically Monty Python and the Holy Grail if it wasn't funny, but still ended on a punchline.
Off with your head.
One of the coolest things about this film has to be its presentation. Just the way everything looks is astounding. This is easily the best looking medieval movie I've ever seen. There were so many shots that stuck with me as I was leaving the theater. It also has so many talented actors giving incredible performances. Dev Patel was great, Alicia Vikander was great, Joel Edgerton was weird in a good way, even that one woman who was bad in Falcon and the Winter Soldier was solid. But by far the biggest highlight for me was Ralph Ineson as the Green Knight himself. Not only was his performance cryptic and haunting with just a dash of goof, the makeup and prosthetics were insane. Everything about this character was cool, and I loved every second he was on screen. Overall, this movie is really solid with great performances and fantastic cinematography. It's admittedly a slow burn, which I'm not always against necessarily, but it does make for an exhausting first watch. I honestly had no idea where most of it was going, and it kinda led to me being a tad bored here and there. But the good was so good that it still left me thinking fondly of the experience overall. It's a movie I could watch again to truly figure out what it's saying thematically. All in all though, not as good as Holy Grail, but still good. At first I was kinda worried about Encanto. Everyone seemed to be loving it and calling it one of the best Disney movies of the past couple of years. And I just didn't get it. Not only did the trailer seem extremely generic and lame, I could already see the moral they were going to explore coming a mile away. It was incredibly obvious that the main character was going to learn to appreciate the fact that she doesn't have powers and that the family would accept her for who she is. There would be the occasional catchy musical number, the animation would admittedly be impressive but nothing we haven't seen from the studio before. There would be the occasional terrible adult joke to give it that PG rating, and overall the experience would leave people underwhelmed. So then it's forgotten a year later, so then animation Twitter can call it underrated. You know, like Disney's other animated movie that came out this year. Basically what I'm saying is, I was expecting the worst from Encanto. And while I can't say it's perfect, I was impressed with a lot of what this movie pulled off. For every cliche it pulled, and it did pull quite a few, the movie took the opportunity to give us something new. At first you think the movie's gonna show our main character to be this perfect miss-do-nothing-wrong, and every family member is an irredeemable jerk. But in actuality, there are no set-in-stone bad guys. It's just a natural family drama where everyone is a jerk at first to each other, but they're able to talk out their problems because they're all still family and love each other deep down. It's actually handled in a nice and believable way. These people feel like a family and not some hodgepodge of random characters. So yeah, I have no problems calling this one of the best Disney movies in years. Maybe that has to do with the fact that a ton of Disney movies recently have been boring or terrible, but this is still a nice and simple movie that achieves making a compelling family drama. It won't win everyone over, but even if you're the slightest bit curious, I highly recommend it. If you were to tell me at the beginning of the year that a buddy road trip comedy with Tiffany Haddish released on Netflix had made my top 10 of the year, I'd call you a filthy liar because that sounded way too fake to be true. Turns out that hypothetical version of you who could see into the future was right, and yeah, Bad Trip is one of the funniest movies from 2021. Leave it to Eric Andre to take scenarios we've seen in comedies a million times before and give them a fresh new perspective. This isn't just another Borat-esque movie where you have a comedian go undercover and prank people in real life. It's basically a typical buddy road trip comedy, but on crack. It takes advantage of its hidden camera aesthetic and crafts a buddy comedy around it. Eric Andre and Lil Rel Howery are hilarious, and I'm shocked they were able to keep a straight face the entire time. And yes, props to Tiffany Haddish for being one of the funniest parts of the movie. I legit forgot that was her half the time since she was playing the character so convincingly. Basically, this was everything I wanted from Borat 2. A fresh new take on a subgenre of comedy that I didn't think could be made anymore. The fact that there are people who can still be fooled by this sort of thing is just really cool. Some jokes did fall flat and were incredibly obvious, but I just had the biggest smile on my face throughout regardless. I also want to mention that you should watch through the credits because seeing the behind the scenes of how they made every prank work was super fascinating. It also adds a level of comedy seeing the real people's reaction to finding out the whole thing was a ruse. You'd think that would ruin the comedy, but it actually enhances it. I recommend checking it out in that way.
Hello, I'm Dr. Pig with a word about bullying.
I don't know why people like calling Pig a John Wick subversion. I mean, I guess from a surface level perspective, it's about a guy going on a journey to avenge his beloved pet, but the movie has little to no action. The most of a fight scene you'll get is with Nick Cage kicking a car. The rest of the movie is slow and atmospheric and about a guy spreading his wisdom about wanting to do what makes him happy. Honestly, I love this movie, regardless of whether it's actually a subversion of John Wick. I'm glad there are no fight scenes or neon-heavy cinematography. I love the backwoods aesthetic. I love the monologue at the restaurant. I love Cage's performance and how different it is from his usual over-the-top nature or his lame, monotone boredom. This is one of those movies that further proves Cage is more than just a meme face. He's a legitimately good actor. I love this movie's take on dealing with grief and how it doesn't devolve into any third act nonsense. It remains consistent in its tone and focus. I feel like calling it a John Wick subversion is like calling 8-Bit Christmas a modern retelling of A Christmas Story. Sure in its basic story structure, but there's a lot more to the movie than I feel even the most big word-using Letterboxd accounts lead you to believe. It's a nice, simple movie with a great performance and a great story about loss and grief. If you want a more clear-cut John Wick subversion, just watch Nobody, but still watch Pig because it's still really fucking good.
He stole that guy's pizza!
Licorice Pizza to me is about the messy nature of combining two things that don't necessarily belong together. Both Alana and Gary are always at odds with each other. One is a happy-go-lucky teenager just trying to be nice to everyone he comes across. The other is a tad more cynical and jaded. One is an adult still living with her family, while the other is a kid already trying to run a business. There's also an incredibly wide age gap that will make most tug at their collars, but you still want them to be happy because they're really likable characters. These two, by all accounts, shouldn't be together, and yet the movie still has them hanging out, always coming back to each other even after having a falling out. They have very different reactions to hearing about a tumultuous period in history. One doesn't care, the other cares too much. This movie shows the lengths people will go to just be together, and yeah, even though I love this movie, I will admit I'm not entirely jazzed about the ending. It's pretty sappy all things considered, and I really would have preferred something more ambiguous. I'm not entirely against the idea of these two as a couple, just not at the ages they're at now. I know that's probably my uppity 2022 biases thinking everything old is bad, but even still, the ending could have been a tiny bit better even without the wide age gap. Still, even with that said, the movie is still amazing. The acting, especially from the two leads, was fantastic. Apparently these two have never acted in a major feature before, and that makes their performances all the more impressive. The music cues are great and work better than something like Cruella. The cinematography was great at capturing the feeling of a movie from this time period. I noticed the movie had that classic hum from being filmed on old cameras, just to get that feeling that you're watching an old movie. It's still a delight of a film that I highly recommend, even if you're like me where I'm not always as well versed in PTA's filmography. But after seeing this movie, I'm excited to see more of what he's made.
Poor Peter Parker.
I never thought that an MCU film post-Endgame would make my top 10 of the year list, but when it's a movie as good as No Way Home, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I don't care how many things don't make sense or that this movie is clearly using the same nostalgia-baiting tactics I've called out a million times, or that the end credit scene was literally just an ad for the next Marvel product. I had so much fun. I cheered and clapped and had a grand old time watching this movie on the big screen, and I'm just super excited to watch it again. Let me remind you, I haven't wanted to rewatch any of the other Marvel films from this year. If I could go the rest of my life without ever watching any of the Disney Plus shows or Eternals again, I'd be more than happy. But this is a movie I legit want to watch again and again. It reminds me of Force Awakens. Sure, that movie is fucking stupid and incredibly obvious with its attempts at igniting my member berries, but even when I know there are things wrong with it, I still have a good time watching it. Same thing with No Way Home. Despite the dumb MCU bullshit it pulls occasionally, the good stuff is still worth getting to. Is this the greatest movie of 2021? Clearly not. I have 3 more spots on this list. And it's definitely nowhere near any movie on the Letterboxd Top 250. Yeah, it is strange that so many people gave this 5 stars. Even me giving it an 8 out of 10 seems a bit high. But I'm rating how I feel, and no matter how stupid this movie gets, the highs will always outweigh the lows. It's probably the last great MCU product for a while, possibly ever, but if this is the last one I'm destined to love, then I'm more than okay with that. T10 is a movie I can't even begin to try and rationalize how anyone could come up with it. Like, how does someone not only come up with this concept, write a screenplay on it, direct it into a full-length feature, and do so while keeping a straight face? Well, Julia Ducournau did it, and with flying colors. I already had a weird relationship with her last movie, Raw. That was a film that didn't hook me at first, but definitely grew on me as it went along. In a strange way, this movie is similar in that regard. I will give the film credit that I had absolutely no idea where it was going from the very beginning. I know I'm supposed to say the main character having sex with a car is the strangest thing in the movie, but that's just not true. Like, yeah, the main character having sex with a car is weird, but everything that happens afterwards also has such a strange aura to it. The main character goes on a killing spree and hides out by posing as the lost son to this firefighter and actually gets away with it and even starts growing a bond between the two of them. How the fuck does someone write this and make it good? I'm shocked, disturbed, intrigued, even a little frightened as well. But I'm glad that I am. Watching this in theaters reminded me of when I watched The Lighthouse in theaters. I knew right then and there that I was watching something truly special and that I couldn't wait to watch it again. Not quite as tight as something like The Lighthouse, but I don't want to compare the two anyway. T10 is a maddening film, and I'm very excited to watch the director's next film. I'd say I'd recommend this, but if you really can't get behind watching a woman have sex with a car, then maybe this isn't the movie for you. Still, if you're the slightest bit curious, I'd say go for it. It's worth watching at least once.
Romance. I am French.
The French Dispatch is a nice reminder that I should love Wes Anderson movies more often. I mean, I already love Fantastic Mr. Fox and Life Aquatic, but there's still those movies that at the time of me writing this that I still haven't seen from him. Well, French Dispatch is a good reminder for me to get on to watching those because this was so good. Everything I love about Anderson's work is present in this film. From the amazing color palette to the hilarious line delivery to the unique quirky nature of every little detail. Now obviously this is an anthology film, so there's no true main character and there's a bunch of short stories, so some people may find it hard to get interested. But honestly, the coolest thing about Wes Anderson is how he's able to craft such a unique narrative in such a short amount of time. His stories and characters are already so detailed and condensed that this didn't feel any different. Sure, a lot of these characters didn't get time to shine. I mean, Willem Dafoe only had 3 scenes in this whole movie, and he really didn't do much. He honestly had much more to do in No Way Home, and I was expecting that to be more of a glorified cameo. But, even though not every character gets a large amount of screen time, that's not what the movie is about. Watching through this film is like reading a magazine like The New Yorker. Or I'm assuming it's like that. I've only read the cartoons in the corner whenever I found a copy at my grandparents' house. Anyway, you're just experiencing little tidbits about whoever and whatever. They're just little windows into much larger and grander stories. Any number of these short segments could have been an entire movie themselves. But I'm glad this movie chose to just show us sprinkles of these stories, proving that sometimes you don't need a whole lot to get across something. I'm assuming a lot of people would disagree, and that's fine. All I know is I had a great time watching this film, and I can't wait to experience it again. It's the best original film I saw all year. And yet, it's still not quite my favorite.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Yeah, Dune was easily the movie I loved the most. Not only that, Dune was the movie I needed to see this year that really changed my perspective a little. To me, this movie is really special. Even if it ages in certain aspects, and I realize that maybe it was a tad overhyped, it's a movie that means a lot to me. This is a movie that takes a story I couldn't care less about and make it so I care immensely. I watched the David Lynch Dune a couple years back and I absolutely despised it. I had never read the original source material, but I could tell that I was missing out on something truly great. This was a classic example of a movie trying to seem all grand and important, but forgetting to actually make it seem grand and important. 2021 was filled with so many movies that boasted the same thing, being big, huge spectacles with state-of-the-art special effects and grand stories trying to deconstruct the very nature of storytelling. But again, those movies forgot the basics of storytelling. What makes something like Star Wars seem grand is not just the unique worlds and special effects, it's also the characters and actually giving a shit about their journey. Dune gives us state-of-the-art special effects and a unique world, but also gives us interesting characters. Okay, these people aren't the greatest written characters in cinematic history, but they're a hell of a lot more interesting than the last iteration, or the majority of characters from movies this year. I liked Paul and his struggles as a son with the weight of the universe on his shoulders while dealing with personal troubles. I can't say it was the most compelling character narrative I saw here, but it was loads more interesting than literally any main character from any of the movies I talked about in the last video. Watching this version of Dune was quite exciting. I was watching a story I've seen before, but now I actually cared. I gave a shit about the characters and their stakes in the story. This is one of the rare times where I actually see why a remake was made. Yeah, remember, this movie was a remake. I hate remakes. I've made it clear that if a reboot or reimagining of some kind is being made, the filmmakers better be damn sure they're making something worth watching. And that's why I love this film so much. For even just a split second, it showed me that sometimes remakes can be worth it. This isn't a movie hell-bent on recapturing your nostalgia or trying to trick you into thinking it's good. It's actually a passionate adaptation of something the filmmakers clearly have respect for. Denis Villeneuve seems like he really wanted to make a good Dune movie, and that to me makes this such a special movie. It's also got breathtaking cinematography that looked incredible on the big screen, so that was super cool. Who knows if Dune Part 2 will be any good? It's just as likely to end up sucking as any other sequel. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter, because I've already been reminded that sometimes remakes can be good, but only in very specific instances. And when a remake ends up this high on a list of favorites from someone who usually hates remakes, you know that this movie is truly something special. So those are my top 10 of 2021. Clearly this was a very strange year, as it took me longer to compile this list than it was to complete the other one. I literally had a script for the top worst movies written out in October. But as I said in my 2019 video way back when, I'm always looking forward to the good and the bad in terms of movies. I may sound annoyed whenever I talk about bad movies, but I welcome bad movies with open arms. Watching bad cinema makes watching the good stuff all the more satisfying. Yes, watching Chaos Walking and Spiral in theaters was frustrating, but it made trips to movies like The French Dispatch and Licorice Pizza all the more worthwhile. I don't know what to expect with 2022. Some movies look promising, some look absolutely atrocious. Either way, I'm looking forward to seeing all of them, streaming or in theaters, it doesn't matter. Whether we're living in a dark age for movies, I couldn't care less. As long as I have this channel to talk about films, I'm happy no matter what. So thanks for watching, and here's to all the good and bad of 2022.